Mr. President, I got back late last night from Oregon. Another round of community meetings. You can't do your job well sitting behind your desk back here. You got to get out. And I've had more than 1,000, really more than 1,060 open to town halls, open to all town halls in every corner of Oregon. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the issue that I hear about constantly, and that is the shortage of affordable housing for working families. And I'm going to talk about what it means for my constituents, but I will tell you I hear about it all across the country and from senators on both sides of the aisle. I have just introduced legislation with the distinguished senator from Alaska, Senator Sullivan, to talk about housing that's affordable for working families. Ask the New Hampshire senators about employers and workers facing housing challenges there. Ask those from Kansas what's going on in their city where they can't house teachers. And Oregonians from Brookings to Baker City are facing rising rent and housing costs and are making tough financial choices when they ought to have enough money because they're working hard to pay for affordable shelter. And here's a statistic that'll give you a sense of what the challenge is all about. In my state, 26 school districts have been forced to buy, rent, or build housing for their teachers. So get this, Mr. President, and we're Westerners, we understand this. We know we've got a lot of challenges competing in tough markets. We've got a leg up geographically with Asia, for example, on the West Coast. But we're losing it if we don't have affordable housing for working families, for firefighters and teachers. Folks, the minority community has said, we're trying to start small businesses on a credit card, and we can't afford shelter. And in Oregon, these school districts, more than 20 of them, they're now basically in the housing business. How in the world, I see my friend from Alaska here, we've been talking about these issues, it's wonderful to work with him on it. How in the world did our schools suddenly get in the housing business? And I guess in some places, they're going to, in effect, rent houses they bought to teachers, and the teachers will practically be back. I say to my friend from Alaska, in their college days, they'll be waiting to use the washing machine in line with other teachers. So I just don't think it's right that all our school districts, and by the way, there's a front page story in the Wall Street Journal here not long ago in Kansas City about the same sort of thing. And I've introduced comprehensive legislation as chairman of the Finance Committee to tackle this issue. It's called the DASH Act, the Decent, Affordable, Safe Housing for All Act. Today, we're just going to focus on one piece, which is affordable housing for working families. And Senator Sullivan and I have teamed up here in the Senate. I'm very pleased that our bill is bipartisan and bicameral. Representatives Jimmy Panetta and Mike Carey are offering the same kind of tax credit that Senator Sullivan and I are offering for working families. And our proposal is built on a proven success, what's called LIHTC, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. And my view is that the combination of LIHTC plus the help that Senator Sullivan and I and our counterparts in the House want to advance, those two efforts could spur a juggernaut of new and desperately needed housing construction. Our bill could be a big shot in the arm to the countless middle-income Americans hoping to get their shot at the American dream of owning a home. And I want to, as we get into this issue, of working families, make sure that everybody understands that we're also recommitting our support to the existing programs that help the homeless and help folks of modest incomes like LIHTC. These are people who every week walk an economic tightrope, Mr. President. They're balancing the food bill against the fuel bill and the fuel bill against the housing, costs. And we desperately need more LIHTC funding. And as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I am going to continue to push that. But I don't think the two needs here for working families and low-income folks are mutually exclusive. We can do both. We ought to do both. Our country is not at its best when we pit working families against people of modest means. We ought to be extending opportunity for all Americans. And I can just say, and I'm going to yield to my friend from Alaska, that small businesses across my state, and I heard it yesterday again at our business summit in Portland, they can't grow because employees can't afford housing, even when they have good paying jobs, Mr. President. Families are forced to search for months for reasonably priced properties, only to be up against several other families of similar circumstances contending for the same property. So we are going to continue to try to build on the progress of LIHTC. My hope is, and I had a good talk just this morning with the chairman in the other body, Chairman Jason Smith of the Ways and Means Committee, my counterpart. We had a good conversation about the effort to get help for kids, what's called the child tax credit, and an equal amount of help for the research and development we need for the tax credit for innovation so we can outcompete China. We made good progress just in the last week, Chairman Smith and I, in looking at the numbers and the various ways in which we can ensure that an equal amount of assistance goes for the child tax credit and the research and development tax credit. And one of the reasons I was so pleased to be able to come to the floor this morning and talk with my colleague from Alaska is I think we also ought to be talking about, on top of, and I use those words, an agreement that is proportional in assistance for the child tax credit and for the research and development tax credit. I think on top of that, Mr. President, we ought to give a boost to housing, particularly the low-income housing tax credit, which has gotten significant support from my colleague from Washington, Senator Cantwell, a number of Republicans as well. And we should include in such a housing effort, on top of a child tax credit and research and development innovation package, help on housing, make them all bipartisan. And I see my friend from Alaska here. I thank him for his cooperation. And I'll just say in closing, Mr. President, no community is immune from the skyrocketing cost of housing. And Democrats aren't usually supposed to use this word, but I'll tell you, Mr. President, I am a supply-sider on housing. We need to increase supply. And on that, Senator Sullivan and I are working together, and I yield the floor to him.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I want to begin by offering my sincere thanks to the chairman of the Finance Committee, my friend Senator Wyden of Oregon. I'm honored to be on the floor with him today to talk about these housing issues and this really important bill, the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Act, as he already mentioned, bipartisan and bicameral. Now, as Senator Wyden already mentioned, our country's facing a lot of challenges right now. Inflation, fentanyl coming through our borders, national security threats all over the place overseas. But it's very obvious, anyone reading the paper knows that we're also experiencing in rural and urban America a severe housing crisis. Everywhere I travel in the great state of Alaska, I hear from Alaskans reeling from the scarcity of housing, and it is everywhere. Anchorage, Fairbanks, Sitka, Ketchikan, Kodiak, every single small rural village in my state is everywhere, Mr. President. And I know it's a big challenge in Oregon, but it's a big challenge all over the country. And it's a challenge that impacts low and middle income families, and it stands as a stark obstacle to getting and keeping jobs, to having a family, to building communities. This is really foundational stuff in terms of what matters in communities, housing. So solving this challenge has been one of my top priorities, and I really want to thank Senator Wyden and his team on being so patient and working with us. A real good partner here. This is going to take all kinds of solutions. There's no silver bullet here. It's going to take everybody pulling on the same oar, the Fed, state, private sector, tribes, nonprofits. But this is an important start. And Mr. President, I actually hosted the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Marcia Fudge, in Alaska this past August. We held a roundtable and some meetings on urban housing issues, on rural housing issues. It was very well attended. I want to thank all the Alaskans who took part. They weren't shy with Secretary Fudge. She got an earful. And there's a whole host of things we're going to follow up on with her. Challenges dealing with overregulation from HUD, homelessness definitions, housing formulas for cities, but it was progress getting her up to Alaska. And so this is progress, Mr. President. This is progress. What Senator Wyden and I have introduced is an exciting and creative bill that will broaden a tried and true federal tax incentive program, the low-income housing tax credit. This all started during the 1980s, during the Reagan administration. It's market-based, it's private sector focused, it's a proven successful formula that will help catalyze the private sector to build more housing in urban and rural areas for working families. That's why we actually named it the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Act. Teachers, law enforcement, first responders, nurses, healthcare officials, electricians, the backbone of so many communities are right now priced out of the market to buy a home. Expanding the low-income housing credit will help address the core issues of not just homelessness and overcrowding in many places in Alaska, particularly rural Alaska, but it will empower hardworking Alaskans to stay in our communities and build a more robust workforce. Now, Mr. President, sometimes when you bring legislation down on the Senate floor, you're not sure who's going to support it. Well, I am very proud to say that back home in Alaska, this bill has enormous support. Liberals, conservatives, mayors, our governor, the mayor of Anchorage, our biggest city, the chair of the Anchorage Assembly. And I know these guys really well. They don't actually get along on much, but they support this bill. We have tribal groups, we have private sector groups, we have home builder groups. It is a super big list. And I think that's a signal for Senator Wyden and I that we're on to something here. We're on to something here. If there aren't homes and communities for hardworking families, then entire communities are shut off for growth. Housing is a catalyst for community and economic development and good jobs and pride in where you live. This bill offers one solution that will actually lead to construction of these kind of housing developments. How do I know that? How can I say that? Because as the chairman of the Finance Committee already said, we know this works. The low-income tax credit already works. We know that. And we're building on that program in the best way to ensure that the private sector will actually use this program to break open other bottlenecks for economic development. So, importantly, Mr. President, this bill provides flexibilities to states and developers to decide what's best for their communities, not a one-size-fits-all Washington mandate. We don't like those in Alaska. So, as I mentioned, it has broad support, bipartisan, bicameral, and once again, to my friend from Oregon, I really want to thank Senator Wyden. He was very patient with me and my team. We had a number of edits, so we were trying to make sure this would work for America and Alaska. Sometimes my state has some real unique challenges, and he accommodated so much, was very patient with us. And then you can tell again from the reaction of this broad-based group of stakeholders back home in my state, this has a lot of support. So thank you, Senator Wyden, again. Look forward to working with you and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, getting this over the goal line and addressing one of the big challenges in America that I think impacts every state in the country. And this is a way, one of the many tools we will use to help address it. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I'm going to yield very quickly to Senator Peters after I wrap this up. First, I want to thank Senator Sullivan again for giving us a chance to bring housing in a bipartisan way to the Senate floor. And just tell colleagues there's an opportunity to do something really big here in the United States Senate. I just got off the phone again with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the other body, my counterpart. We are making good progress on the effort to make sure that there's a child tax credit and a significant boost to research and innovation in this country. They have to be proportional. We've made that clear. That's the essence of a good and fair agreement. Now, Senator Sullivan and I and our colleagues who are advocating for LIHTC are giving us an opportunity to also discuss building upon that and taking some steps to ensure that there's housing for working families and for low-income folks. I thank my colleague from Michigan for the chance to close this discussion up.